Snow drifted lazily through the quiet evening air, swirling beneath the yellow glow of the streetlights, as a small town settled into Christmas Eve. Inside most houses, lights glowed warm through frosted windows. Laughter carried faintly from living rooms where families gathered around trees, children tearing open one last gift before bedtime. But at the edge of town, behind a gas station and a half-lit sign that read Mike's Auto Repair, one man was still working. Ethan Parker wiped the grease from his hands with a rag already too stained to help much. The wind cut through the cracked door of the garage, and the single space heater in the corner gave off more noise than warmth. He checked his watch. 8:43 p.m. He should have been home an hour ago. His kids, Emma, 9, and Lucas, 6, would be sitting at the kitchen table with their mother waiting for him before they opened the last of the presents. He could almost hear them asking, "When's Dad getting home?" He sighed, staring at the old minivan in front of him. The couple who owned it had stopped by less than an hour earlier, their car sputtering just as they were trying to make it out of town for Christmas. The husband, maybe in his late 30s, had looked desperate. His wife had been wrapped in a blanket, holding a sleeping child in the back seat. "Please," the man had said, his voice breaking a little. "Everyone's closed. We just need to make it another 50 miles to my parents' house." Ethan hadn't hesitated. He told them to pull in. He could have said no. He'd already turned off the lights and locked the register. But something about the way the man said please hit him deep. Maybe it was the look of that sleeping child. Maybe it was because Ethan had once been the man on the side of the road, hoping someone would stop. Now the garage smelled faintly of oil and cold metal. He leaned under the hood again, his breath fogging the air. "Come on," he muttered. The alternator belt had snapped clean through, and the replacement he had in stock was a size too small. He'd rigged things before, but on a night this cold, he didn't want to risk it failing again halfway down the highway. He heard footsteps behind him and looked up to see the husband standing in the doorway, hands jammed in his coat pockets. "Any luck?" "Working on it," Ethan said. "It's not the kind of fix I can rush, but I'll get you running." The man nodded quietly, looking tired and out of place under the fluorescent lights. "You're missing Christmas for this?" Ethan smiled faintly. "You're not exactly having the best one either." The man let out a soft laugh. "Fair point." They worked in silence for a few minutes. Ethan could feel his fingers numbing, the cold creeping through his gloves. Finally, he found an old belt in a bin of parts, worn but usable. He fitted it in place, tightening the bolts carefully. When he started the engine, the van coughed, shuddered, and then roared to life. The husband's face lit up. "You did it!" Ethan grinned, stepping back. "She'll get you where you need to go, but stop at a shop first thing tomorrow. It's not a permanent fix." The man reached into his wallet, pulling out a few bills. "Please let me—" Ethan shook his head. "Don't worry about it. You've got a family to get home to. That's payment enough." The man looked at him for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Thank you. You don't know what this means to us." Ethan shook it firmly. "Drive safe. Roads get slick this time of night." As the van rolled out into the snow, taillights glowing faintly red against the white, Ethan stood by the door and watched them go. The wind bit at his face, but inside, something warm flickered, a small sense of rightness that made the cold feel almost bearable. When he finally locked up the garage and started his truck, it was nearly 10. His phone buzzed with a message from his wife. "We saved you some pie. Kids fell asleep waiting for you." He sat there for a moment, staring at the words. The truck's heater hummed softly, and exhaustion hit him all at once. He was bone-tired, his hands sore, his clothes stiff with grease and cold air. When he got home, the house was dark, except for the Christmas tree glowing in the living room. He walked quietly to the couch where his kids had fallen asleep under a blanket. His wife, Rachel, appeared in the doorway in her robe, smiling sleepily. "You helped someone, didn't you?" He nodded. "Family broke down by the highway. Couldn't leave them there." She stepped closer, kissing his cheek. "That's why I married you." He smiled faintly. "Are you still okay that I missed dinner?" She nodded. "You didn't miss what matters." They sat for a moment, just listening to the quiet crackle of the heater and the soft ticking of the wall clock. Ethan looked at his kids' peaceful faces and felt the ache of what he'd given up. Time, warmth, the comfort of his home. But he also felt something deeper. a kind of peace that didn't come from what he had, but from what he'd done. The next morning, Christmas Day, dawned bright and clear. Snow blanketed the streets, sunlight glinting off the rooftops. Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee and stepped out onto the porch. His breath turned to mist in the air as he looked out over the empty street. For a moment he wondered about that family, if they'd made it home, if the van had held up through the night. Then he noticed something unusual. A dark SUV slowed in front of his driveway and came to a stop. The driver's door opened, and the same man from the night before stepped out wearing a black coat and a grateful smile. Ethan set his coffee down slowly. "You made it," he said, surprised. The man nodded. "We did. And I came back because I didn't tell you the truth." Ethan blinked, unsure if he'd heard the man right. "Didn't tell me the truth?" he repeated, his breath clouding in the cold morning air. The man nodded slowly, stepping closer. "About who I am." His voice wasn't heavy with guilt, just quiet, steady. "I wasn't completely honest last night. I didn't want to be." Ethan furrowed his brow. "You said you were heading to your parents for Christmas." "That part was true," the man said. "But what I didn't say is that my family owns Halbrook Automotive, the parts distributor you get your stock from." Ethan froze. The name rang instantly familiar. Halbrook was one of the largest suppliers in the state, the kind of company whose contracts mechanics like him could only dream about securing directly. He'd ordered through local retailers for years because he couldn't afford a partnership account. The man continued, "I was driving home from one of our regional sites when the alternator belt snapped. I'd been in meetings for days, signing off on expansion plans, talking about customer trust, about how we want to support small shops." He paused, his eyes flicking toward Ethan's weathered garage. "Then when I needed help, every station I passed was closed. Everyone said no. Except you." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. He wasn't sure what to say. "I just did what anyone would have done." The man smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how few people still do." He looked around the small yard, the pickup in the driveway, the faint curl of smoke from the chimney. "You missed Christmas dinner for strangers." I couldn't stop thinking about that. Ethan crossed his arms, the cold settling into his fingers. "Well, I'm glad you got home safe. That's what mattered." The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. "That's why I came back. To make sure you knew what your kindness meant." Ethan hesitated. "I don't need money." "I know," the man said gently. "But this isn't just money." He handed him the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a letterhead bearing the Halbrook Automotive logo. Ethan unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the words. The paper felt too heavy, too formal for whatever this was. When he reached the middle, his breath caught. It wasn't a thank you note. It was a contract. Halbrook Automotive was offering him a regional supply partnership, exclusive access to discounted parts, direct shipping, and a six-figure line of credit for his shop. At the bottom was a handwritten note, for the man who remembered what our business is supposed to stand for. Ethan stared at the paper, then back at the man. "This can't be real." "It's real," the man said quietly. "I called my board this morning. I told them about you, about what you did without expecting anything in return. We spend millions every year on marketing campaigns about trust and honesty. You lived it. So we're starting a new initiative in your name, the Parker Program. It'll fund emergency service for stranded families across the region." Ethan didn't move. His throat tightened. "You're serious?" The man smiled. "As serious as the night you stood out in the cold to help us." For a long moment, Ethan couldn't speak. He just stood there, the paper trembling slightly in his hand as snowflakes drifted between them. The sound of laughter came faintly from inside the house, his kids playing near the tree, unaware that their father's world was shifting beneath him. Finally, he managed, "I don't know what to say." "Then don't," the man said kindly. "Just keep doing what you do. There aren't enough people like you left in this world." He extended his hand again, the same way he had the night before. But this time, when Ethan took it, the grip carried something deeper. Mutual respect, gratitude, understanding. Before he left, the man looked toward the small garage at the end of the driveway. "You know," he said, "that place is the heart of this town. People like you keep it running. Let's make sure you can keep doing it." When he drove off, the SUV's tires crunched softly over the snow, leaving behind two clean tracks that glistened under the sunlight. Ethan stood in the driveway for a while, staring at the contract again. The numbers and words blurred, but the feeling didn't. It wasn't just about money or opportunity. It was validation, that doing good quietly without expectation still mattered. Later that morning he went back inside, still half in disbelief. His wife was in the kitchen, the smell of pancakes filling the air. "Who was that?" she asked. Ethan set the envelope on the counter. "A man I helped last night. Turns out he wasn't just a stranger." Rachel wiped her hands on a towel, curiosity flickering across her face. "What do you mean?" Ethan handed her the contract. She unfolded it, and as her eyes scanned the page, her jaw dropped. "Ethan," she whispered, "this says they're partnering with you." He smiled faintly, rubbing the back of his neck. Guess missing dinner was worth it. She set the paper down and hugged him tightly, tears glinting in her eyes. "You always said good things come back around." "I guess you were right." He held her close, the warmth of her arms cutting through the cold that still lingered from the night before. For the first time in years, the weight that had been pressing on his shoulders felt lighter. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was standing tall. Outside, the snow kept falling in slow, quiet flakes, blanketing the world in white. Somewhere out on the highway, families drove safely home, their engines running because one mechanic had chosen compassion over comfort. And as Ethan looked out the window at his small garage at the edge of town, he realized that sometimes the miracles we wait for don't come from above. They come from the moments when we refuse to turn away. The days that followed felt like something out of a dream for Ethan. One moment, he was patching tires and scraping together bills to keep his small shop running. The next, his name was attached to a partnership that could change everything. But instead of excitement, what he felt most was quiet disbelief. He still woke up before sunrise, still brewed his coffee from the same dented kettle, still unlocked the same squeaky garage door. But now, something inside him was lighter. He didn't tell many people at first. The contract sat folded in an envelope in his jacket pocket, almost like a secret too good to speak aloud. But in a town like theirs, good news didn't stay quiet long. Within a few days, the local paper printed a small story titled, "Local Mechanic Honored by Halbrook Automotive." The photo showed Ethan standing outside his garage, smiling awkwardly in front of the same weathered sign he'd hung up 8 years ago. The article mentioned his act of selfless service on Christmas Eve and how it inspired a new company program aimed at helping stranded motorists. By the next week, the town had started to change how it looked at him. People he barely knew stopped by to shake his hand. Customers who used to haggle over oil changes brought boxes of donuts. A few even slipped cash under the counter when he refused tips. It embarrassed him at first, but it also humbled him. For so long he'd felt invisible, just another blue-collar man trying to keep up. Now people saw him differently. One afternoon, about a week after Christmas, a delivery truck arrived outside the shop. The driver handed him a clipboard and a sealed crate marked Halbrook Automotive Division. Inside were brand new tools, diagnostic equipment, and a shiny steel workbench that gleamed under the shop lights. A note was taped to the top, "For the man who fixed more than cars." Ethan stood there staring at it for a long while, the smell of fresh metal and oil filling the air. He'd worked in this garage for years, with second-hand tools and makeshift repairs, never once imagining that someone would notice the way he cared. Now every corner of his shop told a different story, one built not on luck but on integrity. That evening, Rachel and the kids came by with pizza to celebrate. The shop lights stayed on late, the heater humming softly as Emma and Lucas ran around pretending to be junior mechanics. Ethan watched them, smiling, the sound of their laughter echoing off the walls. Rachel handed him a slice of pizza and leaned against the workbench beside him. "You've been quiet," she said. "Still trying to believe it's real," he nodded. "Feels like I'm waiting for someone to tell me it's a mistake," she smiled, resting a hand on his arm. "You've spent your whole life helping people. Maybe it's finally your turn." He looked at her, his eyes soft. "You remember last winter, when we were behind on the mortgage, when I thought I'd have to sell the truck?" "Yeah," she said. "I thought that was it," he murmured. "I thought I'd lost everything. And now," he stopped, searching for words, "now I realize the only thing I ever really had to hold on to was doing what's right. That's what got me here." Rachel squeezed his arm. "And that's what's going to keep you here." The next morning, A letter arrived from Halbrook's corporate office, inviting Ethan to their regional headquarters to meet the board and discuss the launch of the Parker program. It felt surreal. He didn't even own a proper suit. Rachel ironed his best shirt that night while he rehearsed what he might say. He didn't have fancy words or business terms, just the truth. When he arrived at the headquarters 2 days later, the building loomed sleek and modern against the skyline, all glass and steel. Inside, executives in tailored suits greeted him with practiced smiles. But William, the man from the snowy night, greeted him like an old friend. "I'm glad you came," he said warmly. "Everyone's been looking forward to meeting you." Ethan shook his hand. "Still feels strange being here," William smiled. "That's the best sign you belong here." They led him into a conference room where the walls were lined with photographs of Halbrook's history, founders, employees, factories. A large banner hung near the back with his name printed beneath a new slogan, "Integrity drives us forward." Ethan stood there quietly, his throat tightening. "You didn't have to do all this." William looked at him seriously. "We did. You reminded us what we lost along the way. We've built an empire on machines, but you reminded us it still runs on people." The rest of the day passed in a blur of introductions, handshakes, and discussions. When they asked him what he wanted most from the partnership, his answer was simple. "I want to make sure no one gets stranded the way that family did that night," he said. "Not if I can help it." That night, William took him to dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the city. The view was breathtaking, skyscrapers glowing against the winter sky. Over steak and coffee, they talked not about contracts or numbers, but about life, about work, family, and the strange way fate moved when you least expected it. Before they parted, William said softly, "You know, Ethan, I've met plenty of people who think success comes from taking. You reminded me it comes from giving." Ethan smiled, shaking his hand one last time. "And you reminded me that sometimes good people still notice." When he got back home that night, his kids were asleep, their small hands clutching stuffed animals under the warm light of the Christmas tree that still stood in the corner. He sat down quietly beside them, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's forehead, his heart full. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel like a businessman. He just felt grateful. Grateful that kindness, even in the smallest form, still had the power to build something lasting. Snow had begun to melt from the rooftops by the time January rolled into February, and Ethan's life had quietly transformed. The garage no longer felt like a place of exhaustion, it felt alive. New tools gleamed under clean lights, the floor no longer dusted with grit but swept daily. The small office that once served as a cluttered corner for paperwork now had a computer, new shelves, and a small framed photograph of his family sitting right beside the Parker program certificate. Every week, calls came in from other towns, families stranded on the road, small garages seeking help, mechanics asking advice on how to join the new initiative. Halbrook had kept its promise. The company funded local programs that provided free emergency repairs for families in need. The Parker program became a quiet movement, one that didn't advertise loudly but spread through word of mouth, the kind of good that traveled quietly but changed things deeply. Ethan never got used to being called a partner. He still answered his own phone, fixed engines with his sleeves rolled up, and drove an old pickup that rattled if he turned too sharp. He still charged fair prices and sometimes waved off small jobs for folks who couldn't pay. What changed wasn't the work. It was how people saw the man doing it. One Friday morning, he was under the hood of an old pickup when a small voice called from the garage door. "Dad?" He looked up and smiled. His daughter Emma stood there in her school uniform, holding a paper in her hand. "Hey, sweetheart. Shouldn't you be on the bus? Mom said I could bring you this first." She ran to him, handing over the folded page. "We had to write an essay about someone who inspires us." Ethan wiped his hands on a rag before unfolding the paper. Her handwriting was careful and uneven, each word pressed into the page with earnest weight. "My hero is my dad. He fixes cars, but he also fixes people's days. When someone's car breaks, they feel scared or stuck, but my dad never lets them stay that way. He missed Christmas once to help a family he didn't even know. I think being kind when nobody's watching is the best kind of hero there is." His throat tightened as he looked up from the paper. Emma stood watching him with hopeful eyes. "You wrote this about me?" She nodded. My teacher said it made her cry. He smiled softly, lifting her up into his arms. You're gonna make me cry too, she giggled, wrapping her arms around his neck. Mom said heroes don't need capes. They just need tools and a heart. He hugged her tighter, the weight of the world melting away in that small, perfect moment. Your mom's a smart woman. Later that day, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light across the town, Ethan closed up the shop early and drove home. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and winter grass. Inside, the kids were building a fort out of blankets, while Rachel cooked dinner. She looked up as he walked in, smiling in that way that always made the noise of the world fade. Long day? She asked. Good one, he said, kissing her cheek. Emma's essay's gonna win her a ribbon, I bet. Rachel smiled knowingly. You always said if you kept doing the right thing, it would come back to you. Guess it finally did. He paused, glancing out the window toward the small garage in the distance. The porch light flickered on, and for a moment he saw the reflection of himself months ago. Cold, tired, and alone on Christmas Eve, working through the night for strangers. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. He joined his family for dinner, laughter filling the kitchen, the kind that came easy and stayed long. When the kids went to bed, he stepped outside for a moment. The sky was clear, stars bright and scattered like flecks of silver dust. He leaned against the porch railing, the crisp air biting his skin, and thought about the strange thread that tied everything together. A broken belt. A stranded family. A missed dinner, and yet that one night had rewritten everything. A car engine hummed faintly in the distance before fading. Somewhere, someone else was probably helping a stranger. Maybe because of a story they'd heard about a mechanic who worked through the cold for nothing more than a thank you. And that thought alone made him smile. Ethan took one last look at the small garage that started it all. Its light still glowed softly through the window, the words Mike's Auto Repair barely visible against the night. He whispered a quiet thank you to the stranger who had returned, to the life that had given him second chances, and to the simple truth that kindness, like a spark, could light the coldest nights. He turned off the porch light and stepped inside, the warmth of his home wrapping around him like a promise kept.